creepy, true horror stories. I don't use Craigslist very often, certainly not more than once a year, but sometimes it's the only way to quickly sell something that can't be sold any other way. But after this happened to me about 3 years ago, I never used Craigslist again. We lived in a very small house for over a year before he moved out. I was 22 years old at the time. I couldn't afford the place anymore since the lease was up in a few months, and I didn't have a roommate to split the rent with. That meant I had to leave too. It wasn't hard to find a room, but the house was much bigger. In other words, I had to get rid of almost all of my furniture. The couch hadn't been used much since my friend moved in a little over a year ago, so it would be a waste to leave it on the side of the road for someone to pick up. I should have had extra money to help with the move because it was pricey. That's why I turned to Craigslist. I had always bought things on the site, so this was the first time I saw anything for sale. As strange as it felt to be in someone else's house and meet a stranger, I had never been through anything else strange. I felt much more at ease this time, because I would be at home anyway since I was the one selling. Someone who was really interested finally replied to the ad and asked to come look it over after a little over 2 weeks. After that, he called me to ask some questions. I felt better because I thought he was probably just trying to keep me safe and make sure I wasn't a creep. David told me that he had just moved into a new house and needed some cheap furniture to make it look nice. I said that I was in the exact opposite situation because I was moving out of my house and into an apartment. He kindly asked me why I was leaving, and I told him that my roommate had moved out so I could no longer afford it. Still, he seemed nice, which made me tell him more than I should have. We agreed to meet at a certain time on a Saturday night around 6 o'clock, after we were both off work. I left the front door open and waited for that time to come. I waited on the couch for more than an hour for the guy to show up. When he didn't, I shut the front door and went to the kitchen to make some food, thinking he had just left. The doorbell then rang a short time later. By now it was 7:30, so it was clear I was a little mad, but I put on a fake smile and opened the door. He put out his hand for a shake and said, "My name is David." He was a big, tall man with a huge grin on his face. I shook his hand, told him it was okay to come in, and led him to the living room. He looked at it for a second and nodded his head to show that he agreed. Then I heard footsteps outside the front door, then an opening and 2 more guys walking inside. "Sorry, these are my friends moving in with me. I hope that doesn't bother you." "Oh, yeah, that's fine," I said uncomfortably, knowing that I couldn't change anything. But to be honest, I was feeling really nervous and had a bad feeling in my gut. And it was hard for me to stop thinking about it, even though I told myself I was thinking too much about it. David crossed the couch to the other side and knelt down a bit, as if he were checking something out. He then stood back up. "What's this over here?" he asked, pointing to the side of the couch. The other 2 guys were there behind me. I didn't want to, but I went over to where he was standing and looked at the couch. "I don't see anything," I said. It looked like he wanted me to get down and look again. 3 guys walked up to me and stood in front of me. David stood behind me. I knelt down slowly and looked to the side, but I still didn't see anything. I felt helpless and scared because I could feel all of them breathing over me. David told me, "I'm just kidding you, there's nothing there," and gave me a hard pat on the back as I stood up. I laughed out loud in a nervous way and took a few steps away. I could tell the other guys were planning something as they looked at David with creepy smiles on their faces. They were in my house, and I did my best to stay quiet and figure out how to get away. I couldn't just leave, and I was afraid to tell them to go. "So, do you like it?" I asked, to get things done faster. David looked at his friends and then back at me. His happy, smiling face had changed. David's eyes were empty for a strange moment, and there was quiet. It was like the calm before the storm. I was tackled to the ground and pinned down hard by one of the guys. His strength was stronger than my first instinct to fight back, so I quickly gave up, hoping I wouldn't get hurt anymore. As David and the other man ran through the house, they stole everything valuable and made a mess of every room. I was still being held tightly by the man on top of me, who pushed my head into the hard wooden floor with all his weight. After some time, David yelled out by the front door. The man got up and ran out of the house. As I lay on the ground in shock, pain, and fear, I heard their truck pull out and speed off. I finally got up after a few minutes and stumbled slowly to the front door to lock and close it. Soon after, I called the police. Everyone knew that David wasn't his real name and that the email address or phone number didn't belong to a real person. They found fingerprints and pictures of shoe prints around the house and on the ground, but there were no leads and the case was closed. They only knew who it was because the shoe prints they found at my house were the same as ones they found at someone else's house a few weeks ago during a similar break-in and attack. Also, that person was at home by themselves. As a result, I made things worse by telling the man that my friend had left. They are thought to be looking for people who live alone. That event has made me very angry and stressed out, no matter what. It made me think I was safe being in my own home, which is why I was lied to and abused. People should be more aware of the risks when they freely let strangers into their homes, even if they seem harmless. Sites like Craigslist are dangerous. Story 2. A few years ago, I tried to buy a truck on Craigslist. Before you say anything, the price was great, and I wasn't having the best time with my money. Even though I had never used Craigslist before, I knew that it was a common place for people to sell things, so I knew it would be cheap. I had to ask my dad for money because I didn't have the few $1,000s in cash that I needed for a cheap car, even though the cars on the site were cheap. But after looking through a few ads, I sent a message to the guy whose truck was for sale for $4,000. He replied quickly and answered all of my questions in what seemed like an honest way. He basically said that it wasn't the most attractive thing, but it would get you where you needed to go. He agreed to meet me at a Burger King that was in the middle of where we both lived because he was interested. It took me about 5 minutes for him to show up after I got there first in an Uber. After a while of talking, he told me more about the truck. He said it had given him some small problems in the past, but nothing too bad. I didn't have the money to be picky after all. So I asked if I could take it for a test drive. He told me about a parking lot that wasn't as busy and that I could do that. I really didn't care what they said, so I pulled out my phone to call an Uber right away. He told me it was across the street though, and that we could ride together. Being polite was important to me, and I had never done anything like this before, so I thought it was fine. Now that I think about it, I should have told him to, but I was young and he was old, so I trusted him. Because he asked me for my license when I got inside, I knew I could trust him even more. It looked like he was a real person. Though he started driving, we went a little further than across the street to an empty parking lot, a few blocks from the Burger King. This was the first red flag, even though it should have been the second or third. He put the car in park and said, "Okay, let's switch." He threw the keys at me and said, "Heads up," as we went around the car, but they didn't hit near me. To catch them, I would have had to jump into the concrete. I stepped forward awkwardly to pick them up, but as I did, I felt his foot hit my side. Next thing I knew, he was on top of me, ripping my wallet out of my back pocket and running back to the truck. I picked up the keys right away because I thought he must have forgotten them in the excitement of the moment, and that I might be able to make a trade. He must have thought the keys he threw at me were fake though, because he drove off and left me there. Things were already bad enough, but I couldn't even get the license plate because everything happened so fast. But I still had my phone, so I canceled the only card I had on hand because I didn't want him to spend money I didn't have. Next, I called the cops. I walked back to Burger King and turned in a report when they saw me there. Something was said about a rusty white truck and a normal white middle-aged man, but nothing came of it. The ad was taken down, and his email address wasn't even a real name. No, I didn't get his plates. It turns out that it was just named after a video game character. In the end, I lost $4,000 in cash, had to wait for a new card to arrive in the mail, and had to get a new license. And the guy wasn't even caught. Don't use Craigslist, and don't be as stupid as I was. Story 3. I used to work for a big maid service, but I quit when a coworker told me she was making more than 3 times as much by working alone and posting ads on Craigslist Marketplace. Of course, I looked into it and finally started doing the same thing. For almost 7 months, I was making a lot of money before something strange happened. People that creepy have never been around me again, and I hope they never do. I replied to a normal email from someone asking me to clean their house. They tell me which rooms they want me to clean, and I set the price based on how long I think it will take. To give them a quote, I need to visit their home in person, or they can send me a video tour. I charge a lot more than my old company did, but this is how we did it. Also, having the same person come over every week makes people feel more at ease. This man sent me a video tour of his house, and it was already very clean. This is common for clients who just want to keep it clean and have someone get down to the details. After setting a date and time, I went for the first time without any drugs. I was going to work on the top and bottom floors for 3.5 hours, but not the basement. I was going to pay extra attention to the tiles in the kitchen and bathroom. I met him at the door, and he led me upstairs so I could work my way down. This is where things went wrong. I started cleaning because I thought he would leave, but he just stood there and watched me. This happens to me a lot with older women who are control freaks, but this guy wasn't looking at what I was cleaning. He was looking at me. He just stood there for a second when I asked him what else he wanted me to do. You know, when I saw your ad on Craigslist, I knew I had to have you. At first, I didn't think of this in any kind of flirty way. I just saw this as some older white guy telling me, a Mexican woman, that I was meant to be good at cleaning. I didn't really care. I've heard it all the time. They usually just say things out of ignorance, but I wanted the money, so I kept my mouth shut and faked a response. Oh, well, thank you. I usually ask that people stay out of the room, though. It's just easier to clean that way, I added. He said, no problem, but it was clear that there was one because he went to the room across the hall, sat on the bed, and watched me while he was gone. I was starting to feel uneasy about the idea of him watching me for 3.5 hours. I had an idea, so I dusted and then started to vacuum while hiding behind the door to move it. I left it slightly open so that he couldn't see me, but in this room at least. I had to finish the day, get paid, and leave this place forever. I went to the bathroom that was next to the room. I had been scrubbing grout for about 20 minutes when I felt like someone was looking at me again. When I turned around, there he was in the doorway. Sorry to bother you, I forgot to tell you to leave the vanity as is. It was my wife's. She died years ago, in 2009. It's been really rough going through all that, so I want to preserve it, he added. Okay, I replied. There was a moment of awkward looking, and then he finally left. If it was so important, I wondered why he didn't just write it in bold to not touch the master bathroom vanity. But as I was cleaning around it, I saw makeup on the counter that I knew had been taken off not long ago. It was 2017, and he said his wife had died in 2009. However, some of the makeup on the counter was from no earlier than 2015. I knew this because I was thrilled when they came out. Just so you know, this vanity would have looked a lot worse if it had been kept. If I wasn't already sketched, I was now for sure. He didn't look at me or talk to me again while I was upstairs, which was nice. That was awful, but I had to go downstairs because I was already halfway through and needed to finish. I began in the kitchen when I got there. You could see the living room from the kitchen, which was another sign that something was wrong. This guy didn't have any pictures on his walls. I've cleaned hundreds of homes, and I've never seen one without pictures. Even people who lived alone had other people's family holiday cards on their fridge. It scared me a lot, but I don't know why. Just as I was about to decide to speed up the rest of the work and save him some money, he walked through the doorway and asked if I could help him out. When I nervously asked what, he said that he knew it said no basement, but he forgot that he was having people over next week, and that's where the pool table and everything else was. He just wants it quickly vacuumed. I told him that I had a lot going on and wasn't sure if I could do it today. Maybe next time. Then he told me I didn't have to do the dining room because no one ever uses it and could just do the floors in the basement instead. I replied that I could come back tomorrow and do the whole basement instead of just the floors, if that was okay with you. I was just trying to give you a little more time. Things changed about him after that. The guy became very strange and told me he only wants the floor done and doesn't understand why I won't do it today. He then said that he and his late wife, who had died years before, really needed the floors down there to be fixed up. In that moment, I knew this person was clearly planning to do something bad, but I didn't know what. I said, if I have time, I will. He replied, well, can I just show you what needs to be done down there? It won't take long, just really quickly. I knew he wasn't going to stop, so I played a phone call and went to the other room. After that, I called my friend to tell her what was going on. He kept a close eye on me, so I spoke Spanish, hoping he didn't understand. She agreed to drive to this spot and watch out for him when I left, so he wouldn't try to follow me or do something worse. At the end of the call, I told him I had to take care of a family matter right away and would be back tomorrow to finish up. This was obviously not true. With the coldest look on his face, he told me, "Don't bother." He then went upstairs while I got my things together. Even though I knew I wouldn't get paid, I felt lucky to be able to leave. The man stared at me through the window the whole time my friend got there while I was loading my trunk. As soon as I got home, I called the cops to report what had happened. They couldn't do much because he hadn't broken the law. He was just being creepy. They pretty much told me what I already knew. I shouldn't go there again, which I wasn't going to do. Everyone should remember that if you offer a service on Craigslist, you can't be sure who is weird and who isn't. Trust your gut and always let someone know where you're going and when you're meant to leave, just in case. What was wrong with that guy? I have no idea what he planned to do to me in that basement. I hope no one else has to find out. There may be true paranormal horror stories. This event still bothers me, even though it happened a long time ago. I stayed the night at my grandparents' house around September of last year. Things looked like they were going pretty normally that night. We ate a delicious steak made by my grandma, watched TV, and then looked through some old pictures. At night, I went to the spare bedroom, which used to be my room when we lived with them. Around 3:15 a.m., I turned on my laptop and put some music on while I got ready for bed so I could fall asleep. Now, let me tell you that there were some strange things that happened there when we lived there, but I wouldn't say any of them were terrible or scary. For example, I've never been a heavy sleeper. Even a quiet step on the wooden stairs outside my room would wake me up. A few times, I woke up to the sound of soft footsteps in the hallway next to my room. When I asked my grandparents later if they were awake, they said no. I even went to check one time, but all the doors were locked and no one was around. Anyway, compared to other rooms, the way my room was set up was a little strange. Before you got to the door, there was a turn in this room that led to a small hallway. That is, you could not see the door from the bed. You could only see the small hallway that led to it. I must have fallen asleep quickly though, because I woke up all of a sudden and couldn't remember how I fell asleep. My body was so tired that it was almost 4 in the morning. This was a little strange because most of the time when I woke up in the middle of the night, I felt pretty awake and fine. That was usually why my body woke me up. I was really tired this time though. Even though I didn't hear anything that woke me up, I knew it wasn't me because I was so tired. With my eyes only half open, I looked in the direction of the short hallway and saw nothing. I closed my eyes and put my head back on the pillow, even though it was dark. Before I heard the awful sound of my bedroom door closing, I lay there in silence for a few minutes. I was almost asleep. I opened my eyes wide and pushed myself off the pillow. I stared into the dark hallway. Before getting out of bed and going to the door, I must have been frozen in place for a minute. I knew something wasn't right, even though there was nothing there. Who opened the door? I always kept it shut. That made me cold, so I quickly shut the door and climbed back into bed. I told myself it had to be one of my grandparents, but I couldn't think of a reason why they would open and close my door. I closed my eyes again and laid still, like I did before, to try to forget about it. Outside the room, loud running steps could be heard going toward the door. The sounds were like heavy, barefoot steps that stopped quickly at the door to the room. I stood there and waited, totally shocked and amazed. I waited for a few long, tense seconds before I heard the door slam shut again. Now I was really scared because I had seen the door close not even a minute before and never heard it open. Even though my heart was beating fast, I was afraid to move. I stayed in bed all night and woke up in the morning. So, as not to scare my grandparents, I hadn't told them. Instead, I made up a reason to leave early and go home. But after a few months, I was staying with a friend and trying to fall asleep while lying on the floor. As I turned away from the door with my eyes closed, I heard it again. This time, the door closed softly. When I turned to see my friend, he was already sound asleep and hadn't heard anything. I asked him about it in the morning, and to my surprise, I haven't heard it since then, not even in my own home. I really don't know what I've been going through, but I have a strong feeling that something supernatural is watching me. Although I still don't get what it means when a door that was already closed shuts again, I would really appreciate it if someone could explain it to me, or even give me a way to get rid of it. Every night I lie in bed scared that I'll wake up to something terrible. Story 2. Last summer, I moved into a small apartment building. It was a cheap 2-bedroom apartment, but it was my only choice because the job I had at the time didn't pay well. It was clear that neither the house nor the room had been well taken care of. A lot of mold had grown in some places, and the whole place looked like it was coming apart. But the lack of other people living there stood out the most from all of these things. When I lived in a couple of apartment buildings before this one, there was almost never a room open. At this place, though, almost all of the rooms were still for rent. It was a small building with only 8 rooms. When I was there, that included mine and the rooms of an older couple on the first floor. The middle and top floors were empty because my room was on the 3rd floor. But those floors never really felt empty. Since I lived there for months at a time, I had heard people talking below me more than once. That was the only couple living below me, so I always thought it was just them. I would hear a woman's voice all the time, though, never a man's. It was even stranger that I could hear them pretty well, even though they were 2 floors below me. That woman would always sound like she was mumbling to herself. When I woke up, hearing the woman talking to herself below me would sometimes give me the creeps, but I thought she might be sleepwalking, and that the sound might have traveled because the vents in my room were linked to those in theirs. Things got worse over time, though. After 2 months, no one else had moved in yet, and I was going up the stairs to my room. As I passed the 2nd floor, I saw that one of the doors to a room was open. As soon as I felt the urge, I took a few steps toward the door to take a look inside. As you'd expect from a room that wasn't being used, it was dark and empty. But as I got closer to the door, I had a really bad feeling, so I went upstairs to my room instead. But that night, when I was taking out the trash, I saw that the door was shut. There was something strange about it that I wasn't sure what to think. I knew no one lived there, so what could it be? That room might have been being worked on by the building owner. That was the only thing that came to mind. So, that night, I went to bed early and had a clear head. But in the middle of the night, I woke up hearing the woman mumbling again below me. Since I had seen the door below me open before, I was more interested in the strange woman this time. I got out of bed slowly so as not to make too much noise. I leaned my ear against the cold floors and listened. Her babbling, which was hard to make out, sounded close but was more of a whisper. If the whisper was coming from the old couple's room on the 1st floor, I knew it couldn't be that close. Seeing this made me nervous at that very moment. I felt like going downstairs to check if the door was open again, but I knew I was too scared to do that. As I thought again in bed, I heard the woman slowly walking around while still talking to herself. It looked like she was walking around the room below me without a plan. But after a few minutes, she stopped all of a sudden. Without a doubt, I was scared. The woman's sudden silence almost made things worse because I had no idea where she was or what she was doing. Fear would grow much stronger that night, though. I lay awake in bed for 30 minutes, starting to think that the woman might have quietly left or was just standing there for 30 minutes. I was too scared to sleep either way. I then heard the floor squeak again because someone was walking slowly across it. This time, though, it was coming from above me. There were soft creaks in the floor that moved slowly through the upstairs room and stopped right above my bed. There were a few scary seconds of quiet before I heard the woman whispering softly above me. Then she let out a long, painful scream that sounds like it was right in front of my face. The room went quiet again. I held my head up and tried not to cry too much because I was freaking out. I mean, how could I not? Before dawn, I stayed up late making plans with my family to stay with them for a while. I gave them money to get out of my lease and moved in with them while I looked for a new place. I only went back there to load my things into the moving truck once. As I was putting one of the last boxes in the truck, the old couple came out to say goodbye. Since we only said hello and goodbye when we came and went, I had never really talked to them, but they seemed genuinely sad that I was leaving. I don't know if they'd ever been through anything like what I had, but all I could think about during our short talk was how different the old lady's accent was from the woman I heard mumbling. I only thought about how happy I was to be moving out after that. I can only say that I hope I never hear those words from that woman again. Stories 3. This story may be upsetting for some readers because it includes death and other upsetting images. Let's get through this. This family had a lot of problems in the past. Before my family moved in, a lot of people died in the house. There was a time when the people renting it to my mom and stepdad didn't want to live there because their son had chosen to end his life. And before that, the house was the site of a few deaths. It wasn't clear to us, but that's what the owners told us. When my mom met my stepdad, they moved in together soon after. I was young when they met. Things weren't strange for me until my little sister came along. Then, everything went wrong. My little sister, let's call her B, and I had to share a room because the house only had 2. When I was younger, I couldn't stand B because she were always crying. But I remember this one night when she cried for hours and then stopped overnight. When I turned around, I saw the dark figure looming over her crib. When it did move, it was slow and light. I was so scared that I hid under my covers until I fell asleep. When I told my parents the next day, they thought I was making it up. There were many more times when I woke up and saw a figure by my sister's crib. Nowhere else in the room, but by the crib all the time. After whining about it for a while, my stepdad slept in my room while I slept with my mom in my parents' room. But there was a lot more going on. My stepdad lost his job not long after I started seeing this figure. Because he worked hard, it shocked my mom a lot when it happened. He was depressed for a long time. He loved his job and must have found it very hard to lose it. I remember that every day he would just sit on the couch and watch TV. When I got home from school one day, I saw him sitting on the couch with a dark figure behind him. Just standing behind the couch, I remember it so well. I started to cry because I didn't know what to do. My stepdad took me to my room to cool me down. I told my mom and dad what I saw when she got home. Once more, my stepdad didn't seem interested, and my mom just looked mad. People didn't believe me. There was silence for a few weeks after that, and then this person started showing up more often, usually with B or my stepdad. I would hear a voice sometimes when I slept in my room. The sound coming from B's crib was that of a woman talking to her. The things that came out of it were always scary, but I never understood them. As B grew up and learned to walk and talk, I saw that she spent a lot of time in that room with her friend. My parents said it was just her imagined friend, so they never seemed to worry about it. I knew what it was, though. The mood in the house got worse as this figure seemed to stay longer. My sister was shy and never talked to anyone. I could feel how angry my mom was, and my stepdad was always sad. I was by myself all the time. When that happened, my parents began yelling at each other all the time. The fact that my stepdad didn't have a job made my mom hate him, and he was a sad mess. It looked like they fought every night, and each time it got worse. I could hear my stepdad telling my mom to put down the knife while I was in my room. That night when I watched TV in the living room was the worst of all. My mom was tired in her room, and my stepdad was asleep on the couch. It wasn't that late, maybe 7:45. I turned off the TV and went up to my room, but when I got to the top of the stairs, I heard whispers and then B talking back to the whispers. I walked over slowly to look inside because the door was slightly open. I could see next to the figure, which looked like it was trying to lead her somewhere. It was only a few steps from the door. When I screamed, the door slammed shut right away. Before my mom ran out of her room, I just stood there crying and yelling. I could barely make out any words, so I just pointed at the door. It was locked when she tried to open it. But since it was a cheap one, she was able to twist it and open the door with her fingernail. B was facing a wall in the corner of the room. That she locked the door when she wasn't even tall enough to reach the knob, my mom yelled at her. B didn't even look like he was responding. After that, I and what seemed like the rest of the family got depressed. No one talked to each other or asked me how I was. It was me and this strange person who took care of my little sister. Once I got to know it, it started to hang out by my bed on nights when I was feeling especially sad. It gave me a strange sense of relief to know that I wasn't alone. My mom finally had enough of my dad, so we went to stay with my grandparents. When she told us to pack up, I saw the figure again by my dad as we walked to the car. It was sad to leave him, but at least he wouldn't be really alone. Horror stories when you're alone at home. Like any other night after work, I was at home making dinner. It was perhaps 6 o'clock at night, and I had only been home from work for an hour. I only had a small chicken breast and some cold corn to cook. I was done with the chicken and starting to drain the water from the corn when I heard a light scratching sound in the house. The sound was short and not very loud, but it made me jump a little because it was so strange. I kept doing what I was doing because I thought the house was making a strange sound that I had never heard before. But at the same time, that sound of scraping could be heard through the walls. I didn't know what to think about that sound because it was so strange. After quickly plating my food, I went to the front door to listen for it again and try to figure out where it was coming from. I didn't hear anything for about 25 seconds, so I went back to the table to eat. There was still no thought in my mind about it at this point. I was just interested in why the house was making that noise. I wasn't scared at all. First, I ate for a short time, then I went to the couch to rest and watch some Netflix. But I kept hearing that annoying scraping sound over and over again during the show. At one point, it was so annoying that I turned off the TV and listened while I waited. The sound came again, and this time I could hear it better coming from upstairs. I quickly walked up to the second floor. The house was still making my night miserable, but I was also a little more worried that there might be something wrong with it. I waited for the sound again in the hallway when I got to the top of the stairs. There was silence for a minute, so I checked each room to make sure everything was okay. It didn't look like anything was broken or out of the ordinary, so I was getting worse and more worried. Putting on my shoes, I went outside. It was dark, but I thought I might be able to see something like a tree scraping against the house. I knew there was a tree on the side of the house, but it wasn't windy, and the branches weren't even close to the side. As I stood there, I couldn't help but wonder how this was happening, and why it started tonight. This was the last thing I wanted to do, because I was tired. Back to the front of the house I went, and as I walked toward the front door, a flash of light caught my eye. I looked around, and it seemed to be coming from the front of the house. I walked further down the driveway along the path, and turned around to look back. In a dark room in my house, I saw a small light coming from one of the windows. I saw it was the upstairs window after a few seconds. The light was moving around like someone was shining a flashlight around. I was scared to death that someone was doing something in my attic. I stood outside and called the cops while I looked out the window and watched the light slowly move around. But while I was on the phone, the light dimmed and then came straight at me. They left it there for a few seconds and then turned it off. I could hear a few loud thuds from outside. I ran over to my neighbor's yard right away and tried to explain what was going on while being scared and looking over at my house. It looked quiet and peaceful from where I was, but that made it scarier because I knew something bad was probably going on inside. But after a while, no one saw anything else, and the police finally got there. First, they searched the house, and then they brought me inside to talk. In the attic, they found several sets of shoe prints. They thought it was probably a group of teens messing around with me and not trying to hurt me. It was nice that there were no signs of anyone living there or anything. But they did find some carvings in the wooden beams. The designs weren't very specific. They were mostly just lines. Again, the police told me that the kids were probably just joking around and trying to make me angry. When asked how they got in, they say they might have climbed up on the roof and come in through a window while I was at work. They did, however, leave through the space in the roof of the attic and my back door. They were sure it was just a harmless group of kids, but that doesn't make me feel any safer. The thought that someone broke into my house and camped out there all day and night while I was there makes me feel very uneasy. Who knows what the group was really planning to do? Those police officers didn't know what the group's goals were either. Story 2. I grew up in a normal area. Our family lived in a nice, average-sized house. We got a small dog named Max when I was 7 years old. He was my best friend for years, but as I got older, I spent more time by myself. But Max was always with me, so I never really felt alone. That being said, this didn't last forever. My family sold our house when I turned 17 and moved 23 minutes away to a smaller, more remote house in the woods. Sadly, Max died that summer from old age. But I was glad it was summer because I could cry at home without having to go to school or anything. Things went back to normal after a few days of sad times as a family over the death of our first dog. They went back to work, but I stayed home for summer break. but I could tell right away that something was different. This was the first time in my life that I was really home alone, without Max always being there with me. Every little sound that came from the house made me feel uncomfortable and paranoid. Plus, we had only lived there for a few months, so I didn't really know the area or feel safe inside yet. Anyway, it was just another normal day, a week after Max died. While they went to work, I stayed home. With only one story, the house was set up in a straight line. The kitchen and living room are right outside the front door. And then there's a long hallway with 2 rooms on either side, and my parents' bedroom at the very end. Since I've been by myself for a week, I've always gone down the hallway and shut all the bedroom doors. I didn't like seeing open doors in the hallway. It made me feel strange, and today was the same. I walked down the hall and shut each door before reaching my parents' room. I pushed the door through the opening and started to walk back, but I realized right away that I hadn't heard the door fully close. I went around again and this time pulled the door shut more firmly. I could hear the click as it locked in place. While I was in my room, I shut the door and put on my headphones to watch YouTube for almost 2 hours straight. But there wasn't much else to do at this point. It was about 8 a.m., and I was ready for food. It was time to go out, so I opened my door and walked out into the hallway. In the corner of my eye, I could tell something wasn't right as I walked out the door and turned toward the living room. When I turned around to look back down the hallway, I stopped dead in my tracks. The door at the end of the hallway was wide open. I mean very open. I stood there for a minute, trying not to make a sound and see if anyone was moving in my parents' room. I didn't know what to do at this point, though. I was pretty sure that someone was in the house because I knew I had locked that door and it couldn't open by itself. But I hadn't heard anything, so I didn't know where they were. By now, they could have been in any room of the house. I chose to walk slowly and quietly through the living room and into the kitchen, turning my head all the time because I was afraid they were hidden somewhere. When I got to the kitchen, I grabbed one of my parents' big steak knives and held it tightly in my right hand. I felt a little better, but I was still scared. Second, I carefully checked the living room and dining room again to make sure the thief wasn't hiding anywhere. Then I stood at the end of the hallway. There was an extra bedroom downstairs. I tried to open the door quietly, but it was old and creaking. Nothing seemed to have moved at all. Everything looked like it was just the way it was. I walked away and shut the door. The room with the open door was my parents' bedroom, so I saved it for last. I was scared. The house being in the middle of a forest and the fact that there was no help close didn't help. It took me another minute to hold the knife and listen, while standing at the opening and only being able to see half of my parents' bed. There was complete silence. I shook and called out, but there was no answer. Fear kept building up inside me. I put on a brave face, but I knew it was all a show. I walked inside and looked around the corner. It looked empty, just like the other rooms, with nothing moving. I knelt down and looked under the bed, but no one was there. As I crossed the bed to the other side, I heard a soft thud from behind me. That's when I saw a small bit of dirt on the floor. My heart was beating fast as I jumped and stared at the closed bathroom door. In there, I could hear a lot of noise and see a faint shape from under the door. I stood there in fear for a few seconds before hearing one last thud, and then the sound of footsteps outside the house. I carefully walked over and opened the door, but right away I saw that the window was open. I was still shocked by what had just happened. I shut it down and locked it quickly, then ran to my room to get my phone. I'm not sure why I never called the cops. Maybe I was too young and didn't want them to come over when no one was there. I know I should have just left the house and called the police though, now that I think about it. Anyway, I first called my parents, who then called the cops and got home quickly. During their investigation, they found small pieces of dirt from someone's shoe almost everywhere in the house, except in my room. They knew there was only one person there, but for some reason, they didn't take anything. Our house had everything we needed. It was clear that this was very creepy and strange, which made the intruder's intentions even more troubling. A few months later, we moved out because the house had other problems. After all these years, I still think about this meeting every once in a while. If I didn't have headphones on and heard someone come in, I probably would have looked and seen them. I wonder what would have happened. It scares me to think about it, but I'm glad that everything worked out, even though the burglar was never caught. Story 3. My name is Damon, and I'm 28 years old. I rent a very small house close to where I work. My life has never been this bad before, but since then, I've been very careful about who I hang out with. During the week, I started the day like any other. I went to work, came home, made dinner, and then watched a show or movie on the couch. I liked staying up a little later than normal on Fridays, but sometimes my eyes wouldn't let me. Around 8 o'clock, I put on a movie and fell asleep during it. I didn't wake up until I heard a loud, sudden sound. It was my phone making a sound I had never heard before. The bright screen on it made me squint as I picked it up from the coffee table. It was a Facebook message notice. When I opened it, it took me right to the Facebook Messenger app, which I had never used before. I didn't know what to think when I got a text message from a guy saying hello. His name looked familiar, but he wasn't one of my close friends. When I clicked on his page, I saw that we had one friend in common and had been Facebook friends for 4 months. This made me remember when I accepted his invite. To be honest, I'll accept anyone's call as long as we are friends. Since I don't share too much personal information online, it never really bothered me. Simply to be nice, I went back to the Messenger app and said, "Hi." But I couldn't help but think about how late it was and how strange it was to text someone at this time. As soon as I sent it, the 3 dots showed up to show that someone was typing, and then a new message read it. I gasped and dropped my phone on the table while looking out the window. It said in the text, "I love that movie too. We should watch it together." But there was nothing outside my window. It was pitch black. When I realized that someone was watching me, I started to shake. It made me feel even worse that I didn't know how long they'd been watching. Then I heard my phone beep again and saw that it had a new message. I was so scared that I couldn't move and couldn't even look at the message. Before the doorbell rang, I felt so strange that I couldn't even tell you how long I was frozen there. When I jumped again, I had tears in my eyes from being so scared. I picked up the phone and called 911. While I was crying and feeling exhausted, I tried to explain what was going on as best I could. I called and was told that someone would be there in 5 minutes. They told me to lock myself in a room and wait for help to come. I agreed, trying to cool down. As I hung up the phone, another message came through, and then another and another. My phone kept beeping, and I finally put it on silent. I just barely managed to open them, and saw about 12 or 16 messages in all caps from the man telling me to open the door. The last message just said, "Never mind." I had no idea what that meant, but it didn't take long for me to figure it out when I heard a soft bang from the other side of the house. It was very quiet though, like it was far away. I stood still and listened for a moment before another one, this one louder, echoed through the hallway by the kitchen. This time I could hear it better and figure out it was coming from the basement. I quickly ran to my bedroom because I heard a much bigger bang, then something breaking. When I locked myself in the room, I couldn't stop crying because I was so scared of what was going on. I could hear the man coming up the stairs and through the basement. Even though I knew the downstairs door was locked, I was afraid the man would break in at any time. Then I heard the doorknob rattling and several pushes, like someone was trying to get through it. Then I heard 3 loud knocks on the front door. "Police! Open up!" I ran to the front door, unlocked it, and let them in. There were 2 male police officers there, and I think they could see the worry in my eyes. I quickly pointed to the basement door and told them that he was inside. They grabbed their guns right away and ran in. As the police opened the door and carefully followed the thief down the steps, they could hear his steps. After a short fight, they caught the man. Just to keep it short, the man broke in through the window in the basement. That's why there was noise? So, he was the man on Facebook? I thought he was using a fake account or something, but it turned out to be him. He broke in for no reason other than what seemed like just wanting to talk to me. That had never happened to me before, so it was very strange and creepy. I thought these kinds of things only happened in movies. In the late part of that week, I deleted from my list of friends anyone I didn't know personally. I feel bad having to do that, but I guess that's just the way things are now.